Lucifer. I'm here. I'm ready.
So you die, you open your eyes, and there's no fire, just a hallway with marble floors, a low hum of something administrative, and a devil in a suit glances up from a clipboard and says, "Right on time, sign here." Most people think hell is chaos, screaming and punishment and fire because someone forgot to think bigger, but that only really works if no one's actually running the place. Because if I were Asmodeus, hell wouldn't be a dungeon, it would be a system, elegant and airtight and completely voluntary, and today I'm going to show you how you can build that, layer by layer, using mythology, philosophy, body horror, and 15 years of making players deeply regret shaking hands with strangers. Let's get into it. The first thing that I would fix would be the aesthetics. I mean, look, canon Avernus is great, battlefields and demon lords and rivers of bloods. It's pretty good, but if I were Asmodeus, I wouldn't be settling for good. I'm going for something that breaks your brain the second you arrive. You know that scene in Constantine film with Keanu Reeves? In hell, it's not all fire and brimstone, it's Los Angeles with skeletal buildings that are half melted into the ground and nuclear heat waves rolling in from every direction. The whole city is like decomposing in real time. That's the Avernus I'm building, eternal decay, not destruction, but decay. There's a difference. Destruction is fast and decay is like patient, and it also means that you can see what everything used to be. Every soul that arrives in my Avernus immediately understands that this place was magnificent once, and it has been slowly, deliberately falling apart since the beginning of time. And that really seems to hit my players harder than like a lava pit. Now the geography gets more interesting the deeper you go, and here's where I pull from sources most GMs probably don't even touch, like Islamic cosmology, which has this concept called As-Sirat, the bridge. It literally goes from one side of hell to the other, thinner than a single hair, sharper than a sword. Every soul has to cross it. The righteous cross easily, but the wicked, their sins have weight, which manifests as actual physical weight, and then they fall down through the layers, through everything, screaming. I would build that bridge into my 9 hells, not as a metaphor, but as an actual infrastructure. You want to get from Avernus to Dis? You cross the bridge, and with every step you take, you feel every choice you ever made pressing down on your feet. Most souls don't make it past the first quarter. Then there's the cold hells, Stygia and Cunnia, and I'm literally going to go full Buddhist Naraka on this, because Western hell is almost always hot, right? Like fire and brimstone, the whole deal, but Buddhist cold hells are so much more unsettling. The cold is so severe and absolute that your skin doesn't burn, it blooms, it cracks open like a flower. The old texts describe it as skin bursting like crimson lotuses, beautiful and horrible at the same time. In Cunnia, it's negative 300 degrees and it has never been anything else. The ice isn't frozen water, it's ice compressed in time. And every layer that you chip away contains a moment that someone wasted, a kindness they didn't give, or an apology they never said. And here's my favorite touch, the idea that hell itself is actually alive. There's a tradition pulled from Islamic texts that describes Jahannam, hell, as a breathing entity. It inhales and roars. It asks God, are there any more? It has hunger and it's something that functions like a voice. You should run your 9 hells like the layers aren't just environments, they're actual organs, and you're not walking through a landscape, you're walking through a body. The earthquakes aren't tectonic, they're heartbeats, and the river of fire aren't geological, they're circulatory. When Asmodeus says hell obeys him, he doesn't mean it follows orders, he means that it literally obeys him, like in some weird fundamental way he's its nervous system. Now let's get on to my favorite part, which is C.S. Lewis, who I think understood evil more than almost any other fiction writer of the 20th century. They described hell's administration in the Screwtape Letters as a society held together by fear and greed, populated by bureaucrats who did terrible things, not from passion but out of procedure. Men in white collars with clean fingernails signing forms that condemned millions and then going home for dinner. And that is the energy you need to bring to your 9 hells. Middle management, Dis, the Great Iron City, would be the most mundane place in the multiverse. It would feel like a bank or an insurance company, or you could even look at it like a department of motor vehicles that has existed since before the concept of motors. And here's something I think we should all steal from The Good Place. In that show, The Twist, if you haven't seen it, Mild spoilers, so be warned. The twist is that the modern world is so interconnected, so systematically complex, that being a good person has become functionally impossible. You buy a fruit and somewhere in the supply chain there's exploitation. You donate to a charity and somehow that makes things worse. The point system designed to reward virtue simply stopped working because virtue itself became impossible to isolate. And that's something we should all definitely implement into our hells. Every soul that arrives gets a ledger, the full accounting of their life in cosmic moral terms. And it is always worse than they thought. I'm not saying that everyone's secretly evil, I'm saying that the system is so elaborate and granular and interconnected that nobody comes out clean. The sword your paladin brought, the iron was mined by slaves, and the food that you donated undercut local farmers and caused 3 families to lose their land. Every act of goodness in hell trails a footnote that goes on for 40 pages. And the beauty and evil of this is that it's not a lie at all, it's the truth. It's just what all of our acts look like when you remove the context and intent. It could even be like Asmodeus is tipping the scales for who he wants to come to hell, because he can remove that morality, you know? He can look at anything you've done in your life and make it evil, even if you had good intentions behind it and didn't even know what was evil about it. And something else that I incorporated was that banknotes work. You can essentially bribe a judge or reduce your sentence, or even theoretically buy your way out, except every transaction is recorded and every bribe you try and make is catalogued. And when you finally drink from the river of forgetfulness and return to the mortal world, Asmodeus gets your receipt and has collateral, and now he has something on you that you no longer remember giving him. Now let's talk about deal making. I feel like a lot of people play Asmodeus's contracts as you ask for a thing, you give your soul, bad stuff happens later, and that does work and it's fine, but you're missing out on a great opportunity here. The fugue plane, for those unfamiliar, is the neutral waiting room between life and the afterlife in the Forgotten Realms. Souls just sort of drift there waiting to be claimed by their deity, and if no deity claims them, they eventually become part of the great cosmic wallpaper. I would have Asmodeus' ambassadors stationed there in little booths with brochures. Are you uncertain about your eternal destination, worried that your god might not pull through? We offer Lumiere employment, entry level yes, but stable, with benefits and communities, and frankly, given what we've heard about some of the divine employers, our working conditions are quite competitive. I mean, let's face it, some souls are gonna sign up, they're gonna be scared and confused, and someone's handing them paperwork with authority and the confidence that they're gonna be alright. And that's how the 9 hells grow, not through great dramatic corruption, but through marketing to the vulnerable. And the contracts themselves should be treated like hit points. I'm not saying literally, but mechanically. A hellish contract in game has integrity and vulnerabilities. Players who want to find a loophole need to research. They can spend the time in the grand trancheries of Dis, risking their sanity session by session, slowly damaging the contract's logical framework until they find a crack. And you could build that into the Zeta problem. The doors are unlocked. Jean-Paul Zeta's No Exit is one of the most unsettling plays ever written about damnation. It features 3 souls in a room. There's no torture devices or demons, there's just each other and the door. And the door is just unlocked. And none of them can bring themselves to walk through it, because hell isn't the room that the 3 of them are stuck in, it's them. It's their unforgiven guilt and their unresolved need for each other's approval, and the endless grinding way that they make each other miserable without ever being able to stop. I would build that into every contract. The door is always unlocked, the escape is always theoretically possible, but leaving requires confronting exactly the thing that you got damned for in the first place. And Asmodeus is just like a genius with human psychology. He's had tens of thousands of years practicing law on behalf of the multiverse's worst clients. He's the best around. Next, I want to look at devil promotions. There is actually a system in D&D that is already pretty good, to be fair. Up the ladder they go, and it's treated like a career path, performance reviews, merit-based advancement, which is fine. It's very on brand for the bureaucratic hell we've been building, but I'd make it physical. Every devil carries inside them an ovatorium, a biological chamber nested somewhere behind the ribcage, containing fetal versions of every rank above them, dormant and just waiting. When a devil earns a promotion, it doesn't just change changed, the new form erupts. The fetal version of the higher rank, having fed off the devil's essence for decades, finally consumes its host from the inside out and emerges, fully formed, damp, slightly confused, and already filling out his first report. And the old body is just compost. I really like that. I think it's so weird and visceral. And I feel like every devil knows that there is something inside them waiting to replace them, feeding off their victories and growing stronger every time they succeed. They probably get to a point and they're like, do I really want to get a promotion? Am I going to be me anymore? How can I get out of this? It could be a good bargaining chip for the players if they come across one that's about to get a promotion. Ambition in hell is like a parasite. And then there's the anatomy, like the devil's bones are slightly metallic. Not like completely, but it's enough that when you hit them with a blade, they sound wrong, and their organs are covered in small armored scales like a crocodile turned inside out. You've got to think about them like not natural creatures, they are constructed weapons that learn to want things. And for the high-ranking archdevils, I take heavy inspiration from Hellraiser. Clive Barker's Xenobites operate on what the film called a theology of the gash, a philosophy where extreme sensation, including extreme pain, becomes a form of enlightenment. Every scar is a lesson, and every wound is a promotion of sorts. Your archdevils would carry their disfigurements proudly, not as wounds but as credentials. You want to know how powerful Glacia is? Count the scars. Each one is a war she survived, or it could be a deal gone wrong that she survived anyways. The Butcher of Nessus, Alicis, the Archduke, could run something like Frankenstein's workshop at an industrial scale. Angels that get captured in celestial raids, stitched to trolls for regeneration, combined with devils' resilience, sutured fiends, biological experiments held together by infernal magic and sheer spite. These are the type of things that show up in encounters and make your players go, what is that? A hell without economics isn't really hell. Asmodeus, and I want to be really clear about this, is not motivated by cruelty. He's motivated by acquisition. The cruelty is incidental. The overhead, the goal is expansion, leverage, and the slow accumulation of influence over every plane of existence. So how does hell fund itself? That would be Mammon, Lord of Mineros, Archduke of the Third, the most underused character in the Nine Hells, in my personal opinion, because I feel like a lot of people play him as just the greedy one. But here's how you can deploy him: economic warfare on the material plane. And I'm not talking about individual temptation. That's small numbers for a guy like this. I'm talking about Mammon's people infiltrating the financial system of major civilizations, collapsing economies through predatory lending, and creating famines through market manipulation. Then, when the desperate and the ruined come crawling, they are infernal brokers ready to offer relief in exchange for consideration at the time of death. Asmodeus doesn't need to tempt the strong, he just needs the world to keep manufacturing the desperate. Soul coins, another canon element I'd lean into hard, are literal currency, actual soul coins with trapped moral essence inside them, the fuel of the infernal war machines. And when you use one, it doesn't drain it, it destroys it. The soul inside experiences something like a second death. Not torture or torment, but annihilation, just erased. Which brings me to the concept that I would put at the center of my hell's judicial system, the second death, borrowed from the Book of Revelation and ancient Egyptian mythology, specifically the concept of Amit, the Devourer. The creature who consumes the souls of the truly unworthy at the scales of Mahat. In hell, eternal torture is for the reformable. Even devils believe that most souls can eventually be broken down and reshaped into useful material. But for the genuinely irredeemable, the ones whose ledger is so catastrophically negative that there is no useful extraction left, they don't get tortured or put in a cell. There is Amit and the scales, and then there's nothing. Completely erased. The truly wicked don't burn forever in hell. They cease to have ever mattered. And the thing for me that makes Asmodeus ultimately unbeatable as a villain and a system, or even as a cosmological force, is his mystery. We know he's a serpent, we know he's a fallen angel, or maybe he's always been what he is. We know that he wrote the laws of Beator into existence, but the real origin contradicted in almost every source. It's made multiple choice deliberately. Let me explain. Asmodeus has different origin stories for every culture that knows him. He's the serpent from the garden, a primordial entity that predates creation, an angel who looked directly into the divine source and couldn't bear what he saw. or a lawyer who found a loophole in the fundamental physics of good and evil. None of these stories are false, and none of them are true. And that's not an accident. He curates his mythology, because if you can understand him, then you can fight him. For his day-to-day enforcement, the way that he maintains order in hell and terror in the hearts of his archdevils can be run in two modes. The first is the Joker mode, which is unpredictable, occasionally generous to a fault, laughing at things that aren't funny and making it impossible to know whether any given meeting is a reward or an execution, because both have happened before, simultaneously. And the second is the Michael Myers mode, patient, inhumanly so. There are stories of Asmodeus going 15 years without speaking, just existing and watching and waiting for something that only he knows is coming, and then when it arrives, moving with absolute precision. Your players should never know which mode they're getting, and that uncertainty is what's going to make the encounter unpredictable. I think at Asmodeus' core that he is patient. At the bottom of the Nine Hells, the very deepest point below Nessus and below the Serpent's Coil itself, there is something that most sources don't like to dwell on. A wound that's miles long, a serpentine shape that barely moves, that breathes once every century, and that has been there since before the Hells were the Hells. Maybe that's Asmodeus' true form, or his prison. No one knows. But the point is that Asmodeus doesn't need to win today. He's already arranged it so that the very act of existing in a universe where he operates puts you slightly in his debt. Every bargain and shortcut and small compromise that you make, they're all pages in a contract that you didn't even know you were signing. The Nine Hells are a proof of concept. They're a literal working demonstration that a system can be made elegant enough and rational and fair that souls will walk into it voluntarily and stay. So how do you run the Nine Hells? And how do you run Asmodeus? If you're a player, have you had any good or bad experiences with your GM running Hell? If so, leave a comment below and let's get debating. I could have gone into so much more detail, and I've got so many more ideas for Hell, so if you like this video, let me know in the comments if you want to see more. Maybe I'll break down each layer of Hell by its archdevil. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay spicy, adventurers.